My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a 31-year-old freelance photographer living in Denver, Colorado. 2 weeks ago, I captured footage that I still can't fully explain. And the more I investigate what happened that day, the deeper and more disturbing this mystery becomes. I need to share this story because I can't keep this secret anymore. But I'm also genuinely afraid of what might happen when people see what I recorded. The implications of what I've discovered go far beyond a simple UFO sighting, and they raise questions about who really controls the information we receive about our world. Let me start from the beginning, because every detail matters, and what seemed like random occurrences at the time now feel like carefully orchestrated events leading to something much bigger than I could have imagined. I've been a professional photographer for 8 years, specializing in landscape and architectural photography. My work has taken me to remote locations across the western United States, and I've built a reputation for capturing images that reveal the natural beauty of places most people never see. But 3 years ago, I added drone work to my services when clients started requesting aerial shots for real estate marketing and environmental surveys. I'm extremely careful about my work. I maintain all proper FAA certifications, follow regulations religiously, and keep meticulous records of every flight, including weather conditions, equipment used, and exact coordinates of filming locations. This attention to detail has served me well professionally, and it's also the reason I have such comprehensive documentation of the events I'm about to describe. On Thursday, October 12th, I received what seemed like a routine last-minute assignment from a real estate development company called Pinnacle Holdings. The contact, who identified himself as Michael Stevens, explained that they needed aerial footage of a potential development site in the Rocky Mountain foothills, about 40 miles northwest of Denver. The timeline was tight. They needed the footage by the following Monday for a presentation to investors. The job paid exceptionally well, nearly 3 times my usual rate for this type of work. Stevens explained that the premium was due to the short notice and the remote location of the property. He provided specific coordinates and emphasized that they needed comprehensive coverage of the terrain, including detailed shots of access routes, elevation changes, and proximity to existing infrastructure. Everything about the assignment seemed legitimate. The email came from a professional address. The contract was properly formatted with standard legal language, and the advance payment cleared my bank without any issues. I had no reason to suspect that anything was unusual about the job. The location they specified was a large tract of undeveloped land near Golden Gate Canyon State Park, in an area known for its stunning mountain views and diverse terrain. According to the property description Stevens had provided, it was 280 acres of mixed terrain, including meadows, scattered groves of aspen and pine, and several hills offering panoramic views of the Front Range. I spent Thursday evening planning my flight paths and checking weather forecasts. The conditions looked perfect for Friday: clear skies, light winds, and excellent visibility extending for miles in every direction. I loaded my equipment and charged all batteries, preparing for what I expected to be a straightforward day of aerial photography. My standard equipment for this type of assignment included a DJI Phantom 4 Pro drone with a 1-inch CMO sensor capable of shooting 4K video at 60 FPS and 20 megapixel still images. The drone had a flight time of approximately 30 minutes per battery, and I always brought at least 4 fully charged batteries for extended shooting sessions. I also carried my usual ground photography gear, a ruggedized tablet for monitoring the drone's telemetry, and GPS devices for precise location mapping. I left Denver at 7:30 a.m. on Friday morning, driving my Jeep Wrangler loaded with equipment toward the coordinates Stevens had provided. The route took me through increasingly remote terrain, first on major highways, then on state roads, and finally onto a barely maintained dirt road that seemed to branch off into nowhere. The access point was more challenging than I had expected. The dirt road was rough and rocky, requiring 4-wheel drive and careful navigation around washouts and fallen trees. I had to drive nearly 3 miles on this increasingly primitive road, before reaching an area where I could safely park and access the property on foot. When I finally reached the site, I understood why Stevens had emphasized the remote location. The property was completely isolated, surrounded by national forest land with no visible development for miles in any direction. The nearest house was probably 10 miles away, and cell phone coverage was non-existent. Despite the isolation, the location was spectacular. Rolling hills covered with golden aspen groves stretched towards snow-capped peaks in the distance. Multiple creek beds wound through the property, and there were several elevated areas that would provide stunning views for potential home sites. I could see why a development company might be interested, though the access challenges would make any construction project extremely expensive. I spent the first hour walking the perimeter of the property, planning my flight paths and identifying the most photogenic angles. The terrain was more diverse than I had expected, with significant elevation changes and various microclimates that would require different lighting approaches. I launched the drone at 10:15 a.m. and began with standard establishing shots, wide views of the entire property, close-ups of significant terrain features, and various angles showing the relationship between the land and the surrounding peaks. The lighting was perfect, with morning shadows adding depth and definition to the landscape. For the first hour, everything proceeded exactly as expected. I had captured several hundred high-resolution images and nearly an hour of 4K video footage covering every significant aspect of the property. The drone performed flawlessly, maintaining stable GPS lock and responding precisely to my controls. Around 11:20 a.m., I decided to get some high-altitude shots to show the property's proximity to major landmarks and transportation routes. I sent the drone up to its maximum legal altitude of 400 feet above ground level and began panning across the broader landscape. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles to the northeast of my position, I could see what appeared to be a large circular clearing that wasn't marked on any of the topographical maps I had studied. What made it even more unusual was that it seemed perfectly round, which is extremely rare in natural terrain formations. But that wasn't what initially caught my attention. What made me freeze was the fact that there were vehicles there, multiple vehicles, parked in what looked like an organized pattern around the perimeter of the clearing. From my drone's altitude, they appeared to be dark-colored SUVs or trucks, maybe 6 or 7 of them arranged in a precise geometric formation. This was supposed to be undeveloped wilderness. According to every map and survey I had reviewed, there were no roads, no structures, and no reason for any kind of human activity in that area. The nearest road access was miles away, and the terrain between my location and that clearing looked completely impassable for regular vehicles. I immediately adjusted the drone's camera to maximum zoom and started recording both video and high-resolution stills. The image quality was good enough to make out significant details, but the distance still made it difficult to see exactly what was happening or identify specific equipment. As I watched through the drone's camera, I could see people moving around the vehicles. They appeared to be dressed in dark clothing, and their movements seemed coordinated and purposeful, almost military-like in their precision. Some were carrying equipment cases or instruments that I couldn't identify from that distance, but the organized nature of their activity was unmistakable. What really unsettled me was their apparent awareness of my drone. I'm experienced enough to know that my drone would be virtually silent at that distance and nearly invisible to the naked eye at an altitude of 400 feet. Consumer drones at that range appear as small dots that are easily mistaken for birds. Yet somehow, the people at that clearing seemed to know it was there. I watched as several figures stopped what they were doing and appeared to be pointing in my direction. One person seemed to be using binoculars or some kind of optical equipment to observe my drone directly. Their reaction suggested not just awareness, but expectation, as if they had been waiting for someone to discover them. This was when I made my first critical mistake. Instead of immediately bringing the drone back and leaving the area, curiosity got the better of me. The mysterious nature of what I was observing overrode my normal caution, and I decided to try to get closer footage. I piloted the drone toward the clearing, maintaining my altitude to stay within legal limits while attempting to reduce the distance for better visual detail. As I approached, the scene became even more puzzling and disturbing. The clearing was indeed perfectly circular, approximately 150 feet in diameter. The grass within the circle appeared different from the surrounding vegetation. It looked shorter, more uniform, and had an unusual pale green color that stood out clearly from the normal mountain grass surrounding it. The boundary between the two types of vegetation was sharp and precise, as if someone had used a giant compass to draw a perfect circle in the landscape. Around the perimeter of this circle, I could now see that there were objects placed at regular intervals. They appeared to be metallic posts or markers of some kind, each about 4 feet tall and gleaming in the sunlight. There were 12 of them, spaced evenly around the circumference, creating what looked exactly like the numbers on a clock face. The vehicles were parked outside this circle in a secondary ring, and I could now count 8 of them, all identical dark SUVs that looked like government or military vehicles. They were positioned with mathematical precision, each one exactly the same distance from the circle and from its neighbors. The people moving around were definitely wearing uniforms of some kind, though I couldn't make out specific details or identify any organizational markings. The movements were coordinated in a way that suggested extensive training and clear hierarchy. Some appeared to be taking measurements or readings with handheld devices, while others seemed to be monitoring equipment or maintaining communications. But the most disturbing element was a large piece of equipment positioned in the exact center of the clearing. It was metallic, roughly cylindrical, and about the size of a compact car. It had several dish-like appendages extending from its sides, and what appeared to be thick cables or conduits connecting it to some of the perimeter markers. The design was unlike anything I had ever seen in military, scientific, or commercial applications. It looked both highly advanced and somehow organic, as if technology and natural forms had been combined in ways that didn't follow conventional engineering principles. I had been documenting the scene for about 10 minutes when something happened that I still don't fully understand. My drone's camera display suddenly filled with intense blinding light, as if someone had pointed a powerful spotlight directly at the lens. The brightness was so overwhelming that I couldn't see anything through the camera feed, and the automatic exposure controls couldn't compensate for the intensity. At the same moment, my controller began making a high-pitched whining sound that I had never heard before. It wasn't coming from the speaker. It seemed to be emanating from the electronics themselves, as if the internal components were being subjected to some kind of interference. The GPS signal indicator on my controller began flashing red, showing that the drone was losing satellite lock. This should have been completely impossible in the clear weather conditions we had that day, with excellent visibility and no atmospheric disturbances. I tried to manually pilot the drone back toward my position, but the controls felt sluggish and unresponsive. The joysticks moved normally, but there was a delay between my inputs and the drone's response that made precise maneuvering impossible. The altitude readings on my display were jumping erratically, sometimes showing that the drone was at ground level, sometimes indicating altitudes well above its maximum operational ceiling. The distance measurements were equally chaotic, displaying numbers that changed randomly and bore no relationship to the drone's actual position. Most disturbing was the compass heading, which was spinning continuously as if the drone was rotating rapidly, though the camera image, when it wasn't overwhelmed by light, showed no evidence of rotation. This electronic chaos continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 3 or 4 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything returned to normal. The bright light disappeared from my camera feed. The GPS lock reestablished itself. The strange sounds from my controller stopped, and the flight controls responded normally again. So all the instrument readings returned to sensible values. and the drone appeared to be functioning perfectly. But when I looked at the camera display to check on the clearing, it was completely empty. All the vehicles were gone. The people had vanished. Even the strange equipment in the center of the circle had disappeared. The metallic markers around the perimeter were nowhere to be seen. The clearing itself looked like nothing more than a natural meadow, indistinguishable from dozens of others scattered across the mountainous terrain. It was as if nothing had ever been there. I immediately brought the drone back to my position, landing it with hands that were shaking from adrenaline and confusion. The entire incident had lasted perhaps 15 minutes from start to finish, but it felt like I had witnessed something that violated basic laws of physics and logic. I checked all the recorded footage stored on the drone's memory card. To my amazement, everything was there. Was their approach to the clearing, the vehicles, the people, the equipment, even the moment when the intense light had flooded the camera. The video files were intact and showed exactly what I remembered seeing. But there were anomalies in the recordings that I hadn't noticed during the actual event. During the period when my controls had malfunctioned, there was a sound recorded in the audio track that I hadn't heard in real time. It was a low-frequency humming or vibration, almost below the range of human hearing, but definitely present in the digital file. The frequency was so low that I could feel it as much as hear it when I played the recording through good speakers. More disturbing was what happened in the final seconds of usable footage. Just before everything returned to normal, there were 3 frames of video that showed something in the background beyond the tree line that I hadn't seen while it was happening. It was a large, dark, disc-shaped object rising rapidly into the sky. The object was only visible for perhaps 1/10 of a second in the recording, moving so fast that it was just a blur against the blue sky. But when I enhanced the image and slowed it down frame by frame, the shape was unmistakable. It was perfectly round, appeared to be metallic, and was large enough that it must have been at least 100 feet in diameter. Most importantly, it was accelerating upward at a rate that would be impossible for any known aircraft. Based on the change in position between frames, it was gaining altitude at several thousand feet per second, which would generate G-forces that would destroy any conventional vehicle and kill any human occupants. I packed up my equipment immediately and left the area as quickly as possible. During the drive back to Denver, I tried to rationalize what I had witnessed. Maybe it had been some kind of military exercise. Maybe the circular clearing was a testing ground for classified equipment. Maybe the disc-shaped object had been a helicopter or experimental aircraft that looked strange due to the camera angle and motion blur. But deep down, I knew that none of these explanations fit what I had actually observed. The vehicles had disappeared far too quickly for them to have simply driven away, especially given the terrain. There were no access roads visible in my footage that would have allowed 8 large SUVs to evacuate the area in the few minutes when my camera was blinded. The equipment I had seen was unlike anything in known military or civilian inventories. The design aesthetic, the way it seemed to integrate with the environment, and its apparent ability to affect electronic systems at a distance suggested technology that was far beyond current human capabilities. Most significantly, the timing was too perfect to be coincidental. The electronic malfunctions had begun the moment I got close enough to capture clear, detailed footage of the scene, and they had ended the instant everything disappeared. The interference was targeted, specific, and precisely timed to prevent documentation of whatever was happening in that clearing. When I got home that evening, I spent hours analyzing the footage frame by frame on my computer. The more I studied it, the more questions arose and the fewer answers I found. The people in the clearing moved with a precision that suggested extensive training and coordination, but their activities didn't match any standard military or scientific protocol I was familiar with. They seemed to be conducting some kind of ceremony or ritual as much as they were performing technical operations. The vehicles were arranged in a pattern that had geometric significance beyond mere convenience. The spacing between them, the angles of their positioning, and their relationship to the circular clearing suggested mathematical principles that served some specific purpose. The equipment in the center was the most puzzling element. Its design incorporated curves and surfaces that looked almost organic, as if it had been grown rather than manufactured. The connections between it and the perimeter markers suggested that the entire site was functioning as a single integrated system rather than a collection of separate devices. I began researching the area where I had witnessed these events. What I discovered made the situation even more mysterious and concerning. According to official property records, the land where I had seen the clearing wasn't owned by any private entity or government agency. It was designated as part of the National Forest System, specifically protected as wilderness area where no development or mechanized activity was permitted. More puzzling was the fact that when I searched for historical references to the area, I found several mentions of unusual phenomena dating back more than 50 years. Native American tribal histories included stories about sky visitors who appeared in that region. Early European settlers reported strange lights and sounds. Even modern hiking guides mentioned that the area was avoided by local wildlife and that electronic equipment often malfunctioned there. I also discovered something that shook me to my core. The company that had hired me, Pinnacle Holdings, didn't exist. I spent an entire day trying to verify the legitimacy of the business. I searched corporate databases, checked business license records, and even hired a private investigator to trace the company registration. What I found was an elaborate facade designed to appear legitimate but lacking any substance. The business address led to a mail drop service that had no record of Pinnacle Holdings as a client. The phone number connected to a generic voicemail system with no identifying information. The corporate registration documents existed but were filled with false information and led to dead ends when investigated further. Most disturbing was the discovery that the payment I had received was real money from a real bank account, but the account belonged to a shell corporation that existed only on paper and had no identifiable source of funding. Someone with significant resources and sophisticated knowledge of corporate structures had created an entirely fictional company for the sole purpose of sending me to that specific location at that specific time. They had paid me substantial money to ensure I would be there with professional recording equipment, positioned perfectly to document whatever had been happening in that clearing. But they had also ensured that I would have no legal standing or credible institutional backing if I tried to report what I had witnessed. I was simultaneously a paid observer and a completely discredited witness. This realization led me to a disturbing question. How many other photographers, journalists, or investigators had been similarly manipulated? How many UFO sightings or unexplained phenomena were actually carefully orchestrated events designed to serve some hidden agenda? Over the next few days, I became acutely aware of surveillance around my home and workplace. The signs were subtle at first. The same vehicles parked on different streets near my apartment, unfamiliar faces in places where I regularly spent time, phone calls that ended immediately when I answered. But the surveillance gradually became more obvious, as if the watchers wanted me to know I was being monitored. A dark SUV, similar to those I had seen in the clearing, began parking directly across from my apartment, often for hours at a time. When I approached the vehicle, it would drive away only to return later in the day. My internet searches were being monitored in ways that became increasingly apparent. Websites that had been accessible previously would suddenly become unavailable or would load extremely slowly. Search results for terms related to my experience would return different information than they had the day before, as if content was being filtered or modified in real time. Most unsettling were the phone calls. Several times each day my phone would ring, and when I answered, there would be silence for 10 or 15 seconds before the line went dead. The calls came from different numbers, but they all followed the same pattern and occurred at times when I was alone or engaged in research related to my experience. I began to feel like I was being psychologically conditioned, trained to understand that my activities were being monitored without being directly confronted or threatened. It was a form of harassment that was simultaneously obvious and undeniable, invasive and subtle. A week after my encounter, I made a decision that changed the trajectory of my investigation. Instead of trying to avoid the surveillance or pretend it wasn't happening, I decided to treat it as additional evidence and begin documenting it systematically. I started keeping detailed logs of every suspicious incident, photographing vehicles that appeared to be conducting surveillance, and recording phone calls and internet anomalies. If someone wanted me to know I was being watched, I would create a comprehensive record of exactly how that surveillance was being conducted. This decision led me to discover something that expanded the mystery far beyond my individual experience. I was browsing online forums related to drone photography and unexplained aerial phenomena, hoping to find others who might have had similar experiences. Most of what I found was predictable: UFO enthusiasts sharing blurry videos, conspiracy theorists promoting various theories, and people trying to capitalize on public interest in mysterious phenomena. But buried in one obscure forum thread, I found a post that made my blood run cold. A photographer in Arizona had shared a story that was remarkably similar to mine. He had been hired by a company he later discovered didn't exist to photograph a remote location. When he arrived, he had witnessed some kind of organized activity involving multiple vehicles and unknown equipment. His drone had experienced electronic malfunctions at a critical moment, and when everything returned to normal, the scene had been empty. His post was only 3 days old, meaning his experience had occurred just a few days after mine. I private messaged him immediately, and we arranged to speak by phone. His name was Ryan Collins, and he was a freelance photographer based in Sedona. His experience matched mine in almost every significant detail. Ryan had been contacted by a company calling itself Desert Vista Development to photograph potential resort property in the Red Rock country outside Sedona. Like me, he had been paid exceptionally well for what seemed like routine work. Like me, he had discovered that the company didn't actually exist and that the land he had been sent to photograph wasn't available for development. Most importantly, like me, he had captured footage of the strange scene before his equipment malfunctioned and everything disappeared. But Ryan's footage contained elements that mine didn't. In his recording, just before his electronics began malfunctioning, he had captured clear audio of human voices speaking in what appeared to be a language that he couldn't identify. Ryan had studied linguistics in college and was familiar with the major language families of the world, but the voices in his recording didn't match anything he had heard before. The phonetic structure, the rhythm of speech, and the tonal qualities were unlike any known human language. We spent hours on the phone comparing our experiences and our footage. The similarities were too numerous and too specific to be coincidental. We had both been manipulated into witnessing the same type of event, separated by several hundred miles and just a few days of time. This realization led to an obvious question. Were we the only ones, or was this part of a larger pattern? We decided to search more systematically for similar reports. Ryan had contacts in the photography community across the southwestern United States, and I had connections through various online forums and professional groups. We began reaching out to colleagues and posting carefully worded inquiries about unusual assignment experiences. What we discovered over the next 2 weeks was both fascinating and terrifying. Over the past 6 months, at least 15 other photographers and drone operators have reported experiences that matched ours in significant ways. All had been hired by companies that turned out to be fictitious. All had been directed to remote locations in the western United States. All had witnessed organized activities involving multiple vehicles and unknown equipment. All had experienced electronic malfunctions at critical moments. But the most disturbing pattern we discovered was geographic. When we plotted all the reported locations on a map, they formed a nearly perfect circle, approximately 800 miles in diameter, centered somewhere in the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. My location in the Colorado Rockies was near the northernmost point of this circle. Ryan's location near Sedona was toward the southern edge. The other reports we collected filled in positions around the circumference with startling mathematical precision. Someone, or some organization, was conducting a coordinated operation across 4 states, involving dozens of separate incidents, using civilian photographers as unwitting observers. But unlike typical covert operations designed to remain hidden, this one seemed designed to be observed and documented. The perpetrators were creating a detailed record of their activities while ensuring that the observers would have no legal standing or institutional credibility if they tried to report what they had seen. But why would anyone want to be observed while conducting clandestine activities? Why go through such an elaborate charade to ensure that their operations were documented by people who could easily be dismissed as unreliable witnesses? Ryan and I developed several theories to explain what we had discovered. The first theory was that we were witnessing some kind of psychological operation designed to gradually introduce the public to concepts or technologies that they weren't ready to accept directly. By creating leaks of footage and testimony that people could dismiss as hoaxes or fabrications, the perpetrators might be preparing society for some kind of larger revelation. This approach would allow radical ideas to enter the collective consciousness slowly, reducing the psychological shock when more definitive evidence eventually became available. The second theory was that we were being used to test public reaction to disclosure of classified technologies or contact with non-human intelligence. Our footage would inevitably end up online and in various research communities, and analyzing the responses could provide valuable data about how different populations would react to similar revelations in the future. A third possibility was that the entire operation was designed to discredit legitimate research into unexplained phenomena by flooding the field with deliberately planted false evidence that could later be exposed as hoaxes. All of these theories assumed human intelligence and earthly motives behind what we had witnessed, but there was a fourth possibility that neither Ryan nor I wanted to seriously consider: that we had actually witnessed evidence of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. The technology we had seen, the coordination of activities across vast distances, and the apparent ability to manipulate electronic systems remotely suggested capabilities that might be beyond current human achievement. The strange language Ryan had recorded, the geometric precision of the sites, and the otherworldly design of the equipment all pointed towards something that didn't fit within conventional explanations. But accepting this possibility raised even more disturbing questions. If non-human intelligence was operating on Earth, why reveal themselves to random photographers? Why create evidence that could be easily dismissed rather than making definitive contact with world governments or major institutions? Unless, of course, such contact had already been made, and what we were witnessing was part of a controlled disclosure process managed by human and non-human intelligences working together. 3 weeks after my initial encounter, something happened that forced me to confront these possibilities more directly. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "Your questions have answers." The message contained only a set of coordinates and a time 2 a.m. on the following Saturday night. The coordinates corresponded to a location about 20 miles outside Denver, in an area of high plains that I had never visited. The terrain there was flat and open, offering no cover or concealment, making it an unlikely location for any kind of clandestine meeting. I knew this was almost certainly a trap, or at minimum, a dangerous situation. Everything about my experience so far suggested that I was involved with forces that operated outside normal legal and social boundaries. Meeting unknown contacts in isolated locations in the middle of the night was obviously risky. But I also knew that I might never have another opportunity to get direct answers to the questions that were consuming my life. The mystery had grown far beyond my initial curiosity about a strange sighting. It had become clear that I was involved in something that could have implications for understanding the nature of reality itself. I called Ryan and told him about the email. To my surprise, he had received an identical message with coordinates near his location in Arizona and the same 2 a.m. time. We were both being summoned simultaneously, 600 miles apart by unknown parties who somehow knew that we had been comparing our experiences. Ryan and I agreed to maintain phone contact throughout whatever was about to happen. We synchronized our watches, made sure our phones were fully charged, and each told a trusted friend about our plans in case something went wrong. At 1:30 a.m. on Saturday, I drove to the coordinates specified in the email. The location was exactly as I had expected, a completely flat, empty field about a mile from the nearest paved road. I had to hike across rough terrain in complete darkness, using only a small flashlight to navigate by. I arrived at the exact coordinates at 1:58 a.m. and immediately called Ryan to confirm that he was in position at his location in Arizona. At exactly 2 a.m., something happened that challenged everything I thought I knew about what was possible in our world. A light appeared in the sky directly above me. It wasn't moving across the sky like an airplane or helicopter. It wasn't rising from the horizon like a flare or rocket. It simply materialized where no light had existed before, appearing as suddenly as if someone had flipped a switch. The light was perfectly circular, about the size of a full moon, and it glowed with a soft, warm illumination that didn't hurt to look at directly. It cast gentle shadows on the ground around me, but unlike normal light sources, it didn't seem to have a specific point of origin or direction. At the same moment I observed this light, Ryan reported seeing an identical phenomenon appear above his location in Arizona. The light remained motionless for about 30 seconds, hovering silently in the star-filled sky. Then it began to descend slowly toward the ground, maintaining its perfect circular shape and gentle illumination as it approached. As it got closer, I could see that the light wasn't actually a light source itself, but rather the illuminated underside of something much larger. It was a disc-shaped object, maybe 60 feet in diameter, with a smooth, featureless surface that seemed to absorb the starlight around it rather than reflecting it. The glow was coming from a circular area on its underside, providing gentle illumination without creating the harsh shadows or glare that would be expected from a normal light source. The object settled to the ground about 50 feet from my position, landing so softly that it made no sound and raised no dust from the dry earth. The landing was so gentle that it seemed to defy gravity rather than submit to it. For several minutes, nothing else happened. I stood there in the cold night air, my phone still connected to Ryan, who was describing an identical object landing near his position in Arizona. We whispered our observations to each other, both of us trying to process what we were witnessing. Then, without any visible mechanism or opening, a portion of the object's surface simply faded away, revealing a doorway about the size and shape of a normal human entrance. Warm, golden light spilled out from the interior, and I could hear what sounded like music. Not quite like any earthly music I had ever heard, but somehow familiar and deeply comforting. The sound seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my mind, creating a sense of peace and welcome that was completely at odds with the strangeness of the situation. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was humanoid in general shape and proportions, but clearly not human. It stood about 7 feet tall, with limbs that were longer and more slender than human proportions would suggest. Its torso was more elongated, and its head was larger relative to its body size. The being's skin had a pale, almost translucent quality that seemed to glow faintly with its own internal light. Its features were delicate and symmetrical in a way that suggested both great age and timeless youth. But the most striking thing about this being wasn't its physical appearance. It was the overwhelming sense of familiarity and peace that accompanied its presence. Despite never having seen anything like it before, I felt as if I was meeting someone I had known for a very long time. The being stepped out of the craft and began walking slowly toward me. Its movements were fluid and graceful, seeming to glide over the ground rather than walking in the normal sense. When it reached a position about 10 feet from where I stood, it stopped and spoke. The remarkable thing was that I could hear its voice clearly, but I realized that its mouth wasn't moving. The words were somehow appearing directly in my mind, in perfect English, in what felt like my own internal voice. "Jake Morrison," it said, "thank you for coming." The fact that it knew my name should have been terrifying, but somehow it wasn't. The overwhelming emotion I felt was curiosity rather than fear, as if the being's presence was naturally calming and reassuring. "Who are you?" I asked, speaking out loud. "That is a complex question with a complex answer," it replied. "We are what you might call researchers, though that word doesn't fully capture what we do. We study civilizations as they develop, and we have been observing your species for a very long time." "Are you from another planet?" "From your perspective, yes, though the concept of planet, as you understand it, is somewhat limiting. We exist in ways that don't translate directly to your current understanding of physical reality." Through my phone, I could hear Ryan having an almost identical conversation with a being at his location in Arizona. "Why are you showing yourselves to us?" I asked. "Your species is approaching a critical period in its development. Within the next several decades, you will face challenges that will determine whether your civilization survives and advances, or whether it destroys itself through its inability to adapt to new realities." The being paused, and I had the sense that it was carefully considering how much information to share with me. "We have observed many civilizations reach this critical juncture. Some successfully navigate the transition to a more advanced state of existence. Others fail and cease to exist as organized societies. What determines which civilizations succeed? The primary factor is whether the species can evolve beyond individual self-interest to embrace collective cooperation and shared consciousness. Civilizations that remain focused on competition, territorial control, and resource accumulation inevitably destroy themselves when they acquire advanced technologies. Are you here to help us? We are here to provide opportunities for those individuals who are ready to understand broader perspectives. The events you witnessed recently and the experiences of other observers like you are part of that process. You deliberately arranged for us to see those activities. Yes, we needed to begin introducing certain concepts gradually through individuals who would document what they saw, but whose accounts would be initially dismissed by mainstream institutions. This allows new ideas to enter your collective consciousness slowly, reducing the psychological shock when more direct contact becomes necessary. More direct contact. Your species will soon be presented with undeniable evidence of our presence. The gradual exposure you and others have experienced is preparation for that broader revelation. The being turned and began walking back toward the craft. "Wait," I called out. "I have so many more questions." "You will have other opportunities to learn what you need to know," it replied without turning around. "But for now, it's important that you process what you have experienced tonight and continue to document what you observe." "What am I supposed to do with this information?" "Share your experiences with others who are ready to listen. Help people understand that the changes coming to your world are not something to fear, but part of your species' natural development toward a more advanced state of existence." The being stepped through the doorway, which immediately sealed itself, becoming indistinguishable from the rest of the craft's surface. The object began to rise, slowly at first, then accelerating rapidly, until it was just a point of light against the stars. Within seconds, it had vanished completely, leaving me alone in the dark field with only the memory of what had just occurred. I stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had happened. My phone was still connected to Ryan, and I could hear him having a similar reaction to his own encounter ending at his location in Arizona. "Did that really just happen?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I replied, though I was questioning my own sanity. "But I'm not sure how we're supposed to prove it to anyone else." We talked for another hour as we made our way back to our vehicles, comparing every detail of our experiences. Once again, the similarities were remarkable and disturbing. The beings we had encountered were physically identical, their messages had been essentially the same, and the timing of events had been precisely coordinated across 600 miles. But Ryan had received additional information that I hadn't heard. According to the being he had spoken with, similar direct contacts were occurring with selected individuals around the world. These contacts weren't random, they were targeting people with specific skills and psychological profiles that would make them effective witnesses and communicators. The beings had also told Ryan that the timeline for broader revelation was shorter than I had been led to believe. Instead of decades, we were talking about months, possibly less than a year. When I arrived home at 4:30 a.m., I immediately checked all my electronic devices to see if any evidence of the encounter had been recorded. My phone had been running a voice recording app throughout the experience, but the audio file contained only silence during the time when I had been speaking with the being. However, I had left my drone in my vehicle with its camera running as a precautionary measure, and when I reviewed that footage, I was shocked by what I found. The landing, the being's emergence from the craft, our entire conversation, and the departure were all clearly visible in high definition. The audio track was silent during the conversation, but the visual record was complete and undeniable. For the first time since this entire experience began, I had clear, unambiguous documentation of a non-human intelligence interacting directly with a human being. But as I studied the footage more carefully, I realized something that made me deeply uncomfortable. Throughout the recording, there were brief moments where additional figures were visible at the edges of the frame. These figures appeared to be human in size and proportions, and they seemed to be wearing some kind of uniform or specialized equipment. Someone else had been present during my encounter with the being, watching and presumably recording everything from concealed positions. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the entire event had been orchestrated not just by the non-human entities, but by human agencies as well. The remote location, the precise timing, even the specific coordinates I had been given, all of it suggested a level of planning and coordination that went far beyond what the beings themselves would have needed. This realization raised deeply troubling questions about the nature of what I had experienced. How long had human governments or organizations known about the existence of non-human intelligence? Were they cooperating with these beings, or were they simply monitoring and documenting contact events? What was the real purpose behind the gradual revelation process I had been told about? Most importantly, what role was I actually playing in all of this? Was I a genuine witness to historic contact between species? Or was I an unwitting participant in some kind of elaborate psychological operation? Over the next few days, I noticed a significant escalation in the surveillance activities around my home and workplace. The dark SUVs that had previously appeared sporadically were now parked openly on my street for hours at a time, making no attempt to disguise their presence. My internet searches were being monitored so obviously that it seemed intentional. Certain websites would become completely inaccessible when I tried to visit them. Email messages would be delayed for hours or would bounce back with error messages that didn't correspond to any real technical problems. Phone calls were being intercepted in ways that were increasingly blatant. I would hear clicks, static, or even brief fragments of other conversations bleeding through my connections. Sometimes when I answered my phone, there would be a several-second delay before the caller's voice would come through, as if the call was being processed through some kind of relay system. But strangely, no one approached me directly or attempted to confiscate my equipment or footage. Unlike the covert surveillance I had experienced previously, these activities seemed designed to be noticed and to create a psychological impact. It was as if whoever was monitoring me wanted me to understand that my activities were being watched and recorded, without actually preventing me from continuing my investigation or sharing my experiences. Ryan reported similar escalation in surveillance at his location, along with more direct attempts to discredit him professionally. Photography clients began canceling contracts without explanation. Online reviews of his work suddenly turned negative, often mentioning his alleged involvement in UFO hoaxes and questioning his reliability and mental stability. Someone was systematically destroying his professional reputation while leaving just enough of his business intact to keep him functioning as a witness and investigator. The pattern was becoming clear to both of us. We weren't being silenced or eliminated. We were being managed. Our credibility was being carefully calibrated to ensure that our accounts would reach certain audiences without being taken seriously by mainstream media or institutional authorities. We were involuntary actors in a complex information operation whose ultimate goals and controllers remain hidden from us. This realization led us to a disturbing question. If our experiences were being carefully orchestrated and managed, how could we determine what was real and what was elaborate theater designed to make us believe certain things? The technology we had witnessed could potentially be reproduced using classified but entirely human capabilities. The beings I had encountered, while impressive, could theoretically be sophisticated biological constructs or even advanced robotic systems. The psychological impact of the encounters could have been enhanced through drugs, electromagnetic fields, or other techniques designed to alter perception and memory. Even the coordination between my experience and Ryan's could have been achieved through careful timing and advanced communication systems. But if the entire phenomenon was a human-created psychological operation, what was its ultimate purpose? Why invest such enormous resources in convincing a small number of individuals that they had encountered non-human intelligence? What strategic advantage could be gained from this kind of elaborate deception? The more Ryan and I discussed these possibilities, the more we realized that we needed additional data points to understand what was really happening. We decided to expand our search for similar experiences, reaching out not just to photographers and drone operators, but to anyone who might have been approached by mysterious organizations or witnessed unusual phenomena in remote locations. What we discovered over the next 2 weeks was both enlightening and deeply concerning. The network of people who had experienced similar events was much larger than we had initially realized. Through careful investigation and discreet inquiries, we identified at least 30 individuals across the western United States who had been manipulated into witnessing unusual activities over the past year. But the pattern was more complex than the simple circle we had initially discovered. When we plotted all the locations and dates, we found that the events were occurring in waves, with clusters of activity followed by periods of relative quiet. More importantly, we found that the nature of the encounters was evolving over time. The earliest reports involved relatively simple sightings of unusual aircraft or unexplained lights, but recent encounters, like ours, involved much more direct contact and communication. It was as if whoever was orchestrating these events was gradually escalating the level of interaction, testing public reaction and refining their approach based on the results. We also discovered that we weren't the only ones who had been contacted after our initial experiences. At least 6 other witnesses had received mysterious invitations to nighttime meetings, and all had encountered beings similar to those Ryan and I had met. But here's what made the situation even more complex. Not all of these secondary encounters had been positive or reassuring. 3 witnesses reported that the beings they met had delivered warnings rather than messages of hope. They were told that humanity was facing imminent threats that could only be addressed through immediate and dramatic changes in social organization and technology use. 2 others reported encounters with beings who seemed hostile or dismissive, treating humans as inferior creatures who needed to be controlled rather than helped. The consistency of the core experience, the technology, the physical appearance of the beings, the method of communication that suggested that all the witnesses were encountering the same phenomena, but the diversity of messages and attitudes suggested either multiple factions among the non-human entities or a deliberate attempt to sow confusion and prevent consensus about their intentions. This pattern reminded me of classic disinformation techniques used by intelligence agencies to obscure their activities and prevent accurate analysis of their operations. A month after my encounter with the being, something happened that forced me to confront the possibility that the entire phenomenon might be more dangerous than I had realized. I received a phone call from a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who identified herself as a researcher with the Centers for Disease Control. She explained that she was investigating reports of unusual neurological symptoms among people who had claimed to have contact experiences with non-human entities. Dr. Martinez asked if I would be willing to participate in a confidential medical study involving brain imaging and neurological testing. She explained that several other contactees had undergone similar testing and that preliminary results suggested that contact events might cause measurable changes in brain function. The idea that my encounter might have caused physical changes to my brain was both fascinating and terrifying. I agreed to participate in the study, but insisted on bringing my own medical advocate and having copies of all test results. The testing took place at a private medical facility in Denver that specialized in experimental neurology research. The procedures included extensive MRI imaging, cognitive function tests, and analysis of brainwave patterns using advanced EEG equipment. The results were unlike anything I had expected. Dr. Martinez showed me brain scans comparing my current neural activity to baseline patterns from a large database of normal individuals. The differences were dramatic and unmistakable. Areas of my brain associated with pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, and information processing showed significantly higher levels of activity than the normal range. More striking was increased connectivity between different brain regions, suggesting that my neural networks were operating in ways that were fundamentally different from typical human brain function. These changes are consistent with what we've observed in other contactees, Dr. Martinez explained. But your modifications are more extensive than most, possibly because you've had multiple exposure events. What kind of modifications? I asked. Your brain appears to be processing information in ways that are more efficient and more integrated than normal human cognition. You may be experiencing enhanced memory, improved pattern recognition, and increased ability to synthesize complex information from multiple sources. Is this permanent? We don't know. We've been tracking some individuals for over 2 years, and their modifications appear to be stable and may even be continuing to develop. Dr. Martinez also showed me data, suggesting that the changes weren't limited to cognitive function. Contactees showed altered sleep patterns, changes in circadian rhythms, and modifications to their electromagnetic field signatures that could be detected with sensitive instruments. It's as if contact with these entities triggers some kind of upgrade to human neural architecture, she said, but we don't understand the mechanism or the long-term implications. I asked Dr. Martinez whether these changes were beneficial, harmful, or neutral in their effects on human health and well-being. Her answer was troubling. The cognitive enhancements appear to be beneficial in most cases. Contactees report improved problem-solving abilities, enhanced creativity, and better emotional regulation. But there are also concerning aspects. What kind of concerns? Some individuals report feeling increasingly disconnected from normal human social interactions. They describe feeling like they can see patterns and connections that others can't, which can lead to isolation and frustration. More seriously, a few contactees have reported experiencing what they describe as shared consciousness moments when they seem to be accessing thoughts or information that doesn't originate from their own minds. The implications of what Dr. Martinez was telling me was staggering. If contact with non-human entities was causing permanent changes to human brain function, then everyone who had experienced these encounters was being fundamentally altered in ways that might affect their humanity itself. But was this happening accidentally as a side effect of contact, or was it the intended result of a systematic program designed to modify human consciousness? I asked Dr. Martinez how many people had undergone testing for these modifications. We've identified and tested 47 individuals so far, she said, but we believe there are many more who haven't come forward or who aren't aware that they've been affected. How are you finding these people? Some contact us after hearing about our research. Others are referred by colleagues or medical professionals who notice unusual symptoms or abilities. But honestly, we're probably only seeing a small fraction of those who have been affected. Dr. Martinez gave me secure contact information and asked me to reach out to other potential contactees who might be willing to participate in the research. She emphasized that the study was being conducted independently of any government agencies, though she admitted that they were receiving funding from sources that preferred to remain anonymous. That evening, I called Ryan to tell him about the medical testing and its results. He had been experiencing some of the same cognitive changes that Dr. Martinez had described, including enhanced pattern recognition and occasionally feeling like he was accessing information from unknown sources. More concerning, Ryan told me that he had been having dreams that seemed to contain detailed information about places and events that he had never experienced directly. When he researched some of these dream elements, he found that they corresponded to real locations and historical events that he had no prior knowledge of. It's like someone or something is downloading information into my brain while I sleep, he said. And I don't know if I should be grateful or terrified. We decided that Ryan should also undergo testing with Dr. Martinez's team and that we should begin systematically documenting the cognitive and perceptual changes we were experiencing. Over the next few weeks, as we tracked our experiences more carefully, we realized that the modifications to our consciousness were continuing to develop and intensify. I found that I could process visual information much more quickly and accurately than before. When looking at complex scenes or images, I could immediately identify patterns, anomalies, and relationships that would have taken me much longer to notice previously. My memory had become extraordinarily precise and comprehensive. I could recall conversations word for word, visualize scenes from weeks ago with perfect clarity, and access information that I had learned years earlier as easily as if I had just studied it. Most unsettling was my growing awareness of what I can only describe as background information, knowledge and insights that seemed to come from sources outside my direct experience. I would find myself understanding concepts in physics, biology, and other fields that I had never studied, as if the information was being provided by some external source. Ryan reported similar experiences, and we began to suspect that we were somehow becoming connected to a larger information network that existed beyond our individual minds. 3 weeks after my medical testing, Dr. Martinez contacted me with results that changed my understanding of everything that had happened. "We've made a discovery that I need to discuss with you in person," she said. "Can you come to the facility tomorrow and bring Ryan if possible?" When we arrived at the medical facility the next day, Dr. Martinez led us to a secure conference room and showed us brain scan data that made both of us question our basic assumptions about consciousness and individual identity. "We've been monitoring the brain activity of 12 contactees over the past month," she explained. "What we've discovered is that your neural modifications aren't just individual changes, they're creating connections between different people's minds." She showed us computer displays depicting brainwave patterns for multiple individuals who had been tested simultaneously while in different locations. When one contactee focuses intensely on a specific thought or image, we can detect corresponding neural activity in other contactees, even when they're hundreds of miles apart. "You mean we're developing some kind of telepathic connection?" Ryan asked. "It's more complex than simple telepathy. It appears that the modifications are creating a shared information space that multiple enhanced individuals can access. Think of it as a biological internet that connects modified human minds." Dr. Martinez showed us data indicating that this network effect was becoming stronger over time, and that it was most pronounced among individuals who had experienced direct contact with the non-human entities. "The implications of this are enormous," she said. "If this process continues, we may be witnessing the emergence of a genuinely collective human consciousness." I asked Dr. Martinez whether she believed this networking effect was an accidental byproduct of the contact experiences, or whether it was the intended result of a deliberate program. Based on the precision and consistency of the modifications, I believe this is intentional, she said. Someone or something is systematically upgrading human neural architecture to create enhanced individuals who can function as nodes in a collective consciousness network. But we don't know if this is being done to benefit humanity or to control us. That evening, Ryan and I had a long conversation about the implications of what we had learned. The cognitive enhancements we were experiencing were undeniably beneficial on an individual level. We were smarter, more creative, and more capable than we had ever been. But we were also losing something fundamental about human individuality and independence. The growing sense of connection to other modified individuals was accompanied by a corresponding sense of alienation from unmodified humans. We found that we could communicate complex ideas to each other with minimal verbal explanation, as if we were sharing a common conceptual framework that didn't exist in normal human interactions. But when we tried to have similar conversations with friends or family members who hadn't been modified, the communication gap was frustrating and sometimes painful. We were becoming something new, something that was still recognizably human, but also fundamentally different from normal humanity. The question was whether this transformation was positive evolution or subtle enslavement. 2 months after my initial encounter, I received another mysterious email. This one was different from the previous message that had led to my meeting with the being. Instead of coordinates and a meeting time, it contained a simple question: are you ready for the next phase? That same day, news reports began appearing about unusual aerial phenomena being observed across multiple states in the American West. Unlike previous UFO reports that typically involved individual witnesses or small groups, these sightings were being reported by hundreds of people simultaneously. The objects being described were large, disc-shaped, and moved silently through the sky during daylight hours. Most significantly, they weren't attempting to avoid detection. They appeared over populated areas during peak traffic times, hovered in clear view for extended periods, and seemed to be deliberately positioning themselves for maximum visibility. Media coverage was predictably skeptical, with most outlets treating the reports as entertainment rather than serious news. Government spokespeople offered vague explanations involving experimental aircraft and atmospheric phenomena. But the sheer volume and consistency of the reports made them impossible to dismiss entirely, and social media was filled with clear video footage from dozens of different angles and locations. Ryan called me after seeing the news coverage. "This is what the being meant about broader revelation," he said. "It's beginning. But we still don't know if we're witnessing genuine alien disclosure or the most sophisticated psychological warfare campaign in human history," I replied. "Does it matter at this point?" Ryan asked. "Either way, something fundamental is changing about the relationship between humanity and whoever these entities are." I realized that Ryan was right. Whether the beings were extraterrestrial visitors, interdimensional entities, or advanced humans using classified technology, they were demonstrating capabilities that far exceeded public understanding of what was possible. They had shown the ability to modify human consciousness on a neurological level. They had created a network of enhanced individuals who were becoming collectively more intelligent and capable than normal humans. They were now revealing themselves publicly in ways that would be impossible to deny or suppress. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that they could orchestrate complex operations across vast distances and time periods without detection by any official authority. Whatever their ultimate intentions, they possessed power that made conventional concepts of national security and governmental control obsolete. I made a decision that I knew would have permanent consequences for my life and potentially for my safety. So I was going to release everything I had documented about these events. All of my footage, all of my research, all of the evidence I had gathered about the coordinated nature of the contact program and its effects on human consciousness. I would make all of this information publicly available through multiple channels, using distribution methods that would make it difficult for any authority to completely suppress. I knew this decision would have serious repercussions. The surveillance around me would intensify. My professional reputation would be destroyed. I might face legal challenges or worse. But I had come to realize that the most important issue wasn't whether the beings were benevolent or hostile, human or alien. The crucial question was whether humanity would face whatever was coming with knowledge or ignorance, with preparation or panic. If these entities were preparing to make themselves undeniably known to the general public, then people deserved to understand the context of what they were experiencing. They needed to know that contact had been occurring gradually for months or years, that some humans had been systematically modified to serve as intermediaries, and that a fundamental change in the relationship between species was already underway. Whether that change would be beneficial or catastrophic remained to be seen, but it would be better faced with information than without it. Over the next week, I prepared comprehensive documentation of everything I had experienced and learned. I created multiple copies of all video footage, organized my research into coherent narratives, and established secure distribution channels through various online platforms and activist networks. I also reached out to journalists, researchers, and public interest organizations around the world, providing them with advanced copies of the documentation and offering to make myself available for interviews and verification procedures. The response was mixed but encouraging. Some recipients dismissed the material as elaborate fiction or psychotic delusion, but others recognized the consistency and detail of the evidence, and several investigative journalists began conducting their own research into the patterns I had identified. Most importantly, other contactees began coming forward with their own experiences and documentation, creating a growing body of corroborating evidence that would be difficult to discredit or ignore. 3 days before I planned to make the documentation publicly available, something happened that confirmed my worst fears about the surveillance I had been experiencing. I was approached directly by government agents. 2 individuals in dark suits appeared at my apartment door at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. They showed me credentials identifying them as representatives of a Department of Homeland Security task force investigating unusual aerial phenomena and related security concerns. Agent Rebecca Chen and Agent Michael Rodriguez were polite but firm in their request to discuss my alleged encounters with unidentified entities. They made it clear that they were aware of my plans to release documentation and that they wanted to discuss the potential security implications. I agreed to speak with them, but insisted that the conversation take place in a public location with witnesses present. We met at a busy coffee shop in downtown Denver, where Agent Chen explained that their agency had been monitoring reports of unusual contact experiences for several years. We're aware that you and several other individuals have had experiences that you interpret as contact with non-human intelligence, she said. We're not here to dispute your perceptions or confiscate your documentation, but we need to discuss the potential consequences of making this information public. Agent Rodriguez added, "We've identified patterns in these contact reports that suggest coordinated activity by unknown parties. Whether these parties are foreign adversaries using advanced technology or something else entirely, the national security implications are significant." I asked them directly whether the U.S. government had prior knowledge of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. Agent Chen's answer was carefully worded but revealing. There are phenomena occurring that exceed our current understanding of natural laws and human technology. We've been investigating these phenomena for decades, but we don't have definitive answers about their origin or intentions. What we do know is that making unverified claims about contact with non-human entities can cause widespread panic, undermine public trust in institutions, and potentially compromise ongoing national security operations. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward and spoke more directly. "Jake, we're not asking you to suppress your experiences or destroy your documentation, but we are asking you to work with us to release this information in a way that serves the public interest rather than creating chaos. What does that mean, specifically? It means coordinating with established scientific and governmental institutions to verify your claims and place them in proper context. It means avoiding sensationalistic presentations that could cause panic or be exploited by hostile forces. I asked them what would happen if I chose to release the information independently without government coordination. Agent Chen's response was diplomatic but ominous. That would be your right as an American citizen, but it would also be our responsibility to ensure that national security interests are protected, which might require us to publicly challenge the credibility of your claims and the authenticity of your documentation. The agents left me with their contact information and a promise that they would be in touch again soon. They also made it clear that my activities would continue to be monitored and that they would be prepared to take appropriate action if they determined that my planned disclosures posed a threat to national security. That evening, I called Ryan to tell him about my encounter with the federal agents. He had received a similar visit from representatives of what they claimed was a joint task force involving multiple agencies. They're trying to control the narrative, Ryan said. They want to be able to shape how this information is presented to the public, but that assumes they actually know what's going on. I replied, what if they're as confused and scared as we are? Either way, they're not going to let us release this information without a fight. That night, I made my final decision about how to proceed. I would release the documentation as planned, but I would also provide copies to the government agents and offer to work with legitimate scientific institutions to verify and contextualize the information. But I would not allow the story to be suppressed or distorted to serve political agendas or institutional interests. The public had a right to know what was happening, even if that knowledge was disturbing or difficult to accept. The next morning, I uploaded my complete documentation to multiple platforms simultaneously. Within hours, the information was spreading across social media networks, alternative news sites, and research communities around the world. The response was immediate and intense. Mainstream media outlets initially dismissed the documentation as an elaborate hoax, but several investigative journalists began conducting their own research and interviews with other contactees. Government spokespeople issued generic statements about unverified claims and ongoing investigations, but avoided addressing the specific evidence I had presented. Most importantly, other witnesses began coming forward with their own experiences and documentation, creating a growing body of corroborating testimony that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Within a week, the story had evolved from a fringe conspiracy theory to a legitimate subject of public debate and scientific inquiry. But I had also become a target. My apartment was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen. My car was vandalized. I received dozens of threatening phone calls and emails from unknown sources. More sophisticated harassment included disruption of my financial accounts, cancellation of services and subscriptions, and what appeared to be organized efforts to damage my professional reputation through false reviews and fraudulent complaints. It was clear that powerful interests wanted to discredit me and suppress the information I had released. But it was too late. The story had taken on a life of its own, and other researchers and journalists were expanding the investigation beyond what any single individual could control. 3 months after my initial encounter, I received one final communication from the entities. It wasn't an email or a meeting request. Instead, I simply woke up one morning with clear, detailed knowledge that hadn't been there the day before. I knew that the gradual disclosure process was entering its final phase. I knew that direct, undeniable contact with the general public would occur within the next 6 months. I knew that humanity would be presented with choices about its future that would determine the survival and development of our species. Most importantly, I knew that people like me, the contactees who had been modified and networked, would serve as interpreters and guides during the transition period that was coming. We had been prepared for this role, through our experiences, our neurological modifications, and our gradual introduction to concepts that would be shocking and overwhelming to unmodified humans. Whether we were willing participants in humanity's evolution or unwilling collaborators in its subjugation remained to be seen. But ready or not, the transformation was beginning. This document represents everything I know about my role in whatever is unfolding. It contains all the evidence I've been able to gather, all the connections I've been able to make, and all the questions I haven't been able to answer. I'm sharing it now because I believe that when the final phase begins, people will need context to understand what they're experiencing. They'll need to know that this process has been building gradually, that some of us have been aware of it and trying to prepare for it. Most importantly, they'll need to know that whatever choices humanity makes in the coming months, those choices will determine not just our survival, but the kind of species we become. The truth is more complex and more disturbing than most people are prepared to accept. We are not alone. We are being changed, and we are running out of time to understand what we're becoming and why. The next phase begins soon. Whether we face it with wisdom or fear will determine everything. This is Jake Morrison, documenting the end of one era of human existence and the beginning of something else entirely. Whatever that something is, we'll discover it together. Ready or not,